March 23rd, 1945. 0600 hours. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, Reims, France. The converted Champagne warehouse sits quiet in the way only command centers can be quiet at dawn. Not silent, never silent. Typewriters clatter in distant rooms, telephones ring with reports from the front, boots echo on concrete floors, worn smooth by years of French workers rolling wine barrels. But quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before decisions that change wars. General Dwight David Eisenhower sits alone at his mahogany desk, 54 years old, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe. The man responsible for coordinating 9 armies, 3 million men, the largest military operation in human history. A man who has learned that supreme command means living in a permanent state of controlled anxiety. Outside, spring rain taps against windows that once looked out on vineyards. Inside, maps cover every wall. Red lines marking German positions, blue lines showing Allied advances, arrows pointing toward Berlin, dotted supply routes stretching back to Normandy beaches nearly a year behind them now. The ashtray on his desk overflows. 4 cigarettes, no, 5, chain-smoked since midnight when the preliminary reports started coming in. Reports that made no sense. Reports that his staff double-checked, triple-checked, certain there must be an error, some mistake in transmission, some confusion of units or dates. But there was no error. His hand rests on a single sheet of paper. A prisoner of war status report, 3rd Army, dated March 23rd, 1945, 0600 hours. The number stares back at him. He has read it 3 times now. Each time his mind stumbles over the same impossible figure, like a man encountering a word in a foreign language he thought he knew. 50,127. 50,127 enemy prisoners of war, captured between 1800 hours March 22nd and 1200 hours March 23rd. 18 hours. His hand trembles slightly. Not from fear, not from exhaustion, though God knows he is exhausted, from something else, from the realization that what he is holding changes everything he thought he understood about this war, about what is possible, about what one man can achieve when given an army and told to attack. The door opens without a knock. Only one man enters Eisenhower's office without knocking. General Walter Bedell Smith, Chief of Staff. The man who translates Eisenhower's strategic vision into executable orders, who turns conversations into directives, who makes the machinery of command function. Smith's face carries that peculiar expression Eisenhower has learned to recognize over 3 years of war. The expression that says the impossible has happened again, and we must now decide what to do about it. Smith places a second copy of the report on the desk, says nothing, waits. He has learned when his commander needs silence to think and when he needs information to decide. Eisenhower looks up. His voice comes out quiet, controlled. The voice of a man who has learned not to show surprise even when his brain is screaming that this cannot be real. Bedell, this says 50,000. Yes, sir. 50,000 prisoners in one night. 18 hours, to be precise, sir. Eisenhower sets down his pen, the one he had been using to sign fuel requisition forms for 1st Army, the endless paperwork of war, ammunition allocations, replacement troops, bridge construction materials, the machinery that keeps armies moving forward, the details that consume hours of every day and receive no recognition because they are not dramatic. But wars are won on logistics as much as battles. Check this again. Smith's expression does not change. His voice remains steady. Already did, sir, twice. Called 3rd Army directly at 0400 hours. Spoke to their G2 myself. Colonel Koch confirmed the numbers personally. Eisenhower pulls the report closer. Rends the breakdown with the careful attention of a man who spent his entire career before this war in staff positions, who understands that details matter, that precision matters. 12th Corps reporting 28,000 prisoners. 20th Corps reporting 22,000. Total 50,127 enemy prisoners of war. Processing capacity exceeded by 400%. Emergency request for additional prisoner processing units, additional military police battalions, additional barbed wire. That last detail catches him, makes the abstract number suddenly, viscerally real. How much barbed wire? 90 miles, sir. Eisenhower stares at him. 90 miles. To fence prisoners in accordance with Geneva Convention standards. To create compounds that meet international law requirements. Third Army used their entire theater allocation of barbed wire before dawn. Consumed in one night what was supposed to last them for weeks. Smith continues, voice steady as always. They have 17 POW cages operational as of 0500 hours. They are requesting 12 more. Emergency priority. They have run out of space, sir. Literally run out of physical space to contain the prisoners they are taking. For a moment, Eisenhower says nothing. He reaches for another cigarette, strikes a match. The small flame illuminates his face in the pre-dawn darkness. Deep lines around his eyes, lines that were not there in 1942 when he took this command. The weight of 3 years carved into every feature. The weight of decisions that sent men to die. Decisions that saved men's lives. Decisions that changed the course of history. He stands, walks to the situation map covering the eastern wall. His finger traces Third Army's positions. The Palatinate pocket, that triangle of German-held territory between the Rhine River, the Moselle, and the Siegfried Line fortifications. 2 weeks ago, Schaef intelligence estimated 14 German divisions trapped there. Battered divisions. Undersupplied, under strength, but dug in, still dangerous, still capable of fighting. Schaef planning had projected 2 weeks to clear the pocket. Methodical advances, coordinated artillery preparation, careful reduction of strongpoints, the textbook approach, the approach that minimizes casualties, that achieves objectives through overwhelming force systematically applied. Patton cleared it in 3 days and captured 50,000 men in the process. Eisenhower's eyes moved to another section of the map. To the north, Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery's positions, 21st Army Group, British 2nd Army, Canadian 1st Army, American 9th Army temporarily attached to Montgomery's command for the Great Set-Piece Operation, Operation Plunder, the Rhine Crossing. 3 weeks of preparation, 80,000 troops, 3,500 artillery pieces, 2 airborne divisions. The largest crossing operation since D-Day. Winston Churchill himself scheduled to observe from an observation post on the West Bank. To witness the British Empire's triumphant crossing of Germany's last natural barrier, the moment when the war turns irreversibly toward Allied victory, the official Allied Rhine crossing. Planned for tomorrow, March 24th. His eyes drift back to Third Army's positions, to the small notation his operations staff added to the map last night. The notation that seemed like a mistake, that he had assumed was a mistake, that he had hoped was a mistake, because if it was not a mistake, it meant George Patton had done something that would require Eisenhower to have a very difficult conversation with Field Marshal Montgomery and Prime Minister Churchill. The notation that says, Third Army crossed the Rhine yesterday, without authorization, without coordination, without telling anyone. Bedell, Eisenhower says quietly, get me Third Army headquarters on the line. Yes, sir. Smith turns to leave. And Bedell? When this war is over and they ask me what was the most difficult part of Supreme Command, I am going to tell them it was not fighting the Germans, it was managing George Patton. Smith allows himself the ghost of a smile. Yes, sir, I will include that in my memoirs. But before we go further into this story, before we understand what those 50,000 prisoners mean, we need to understand something fundamental, something that most histories of World War II gloss over because it is not dramatic, not cinematic, not easily captured in documentary footage. We need to understand that what happened in March 1945 was not just a military operation, it was a collision of philosophies, a confrontation between 2 ways of seeing war, 2 ways of seeing the world, 2 ways of achieving victory that were both proven, both successful, and both completely incompatible. And the man caught in the middle, The man who had to make it all work somehow was not the general who captured 50,000 Germans in one night. It was the general who had to decide what to do about it. March 1945. The war in Europe is entering its final phase. Everyone knows it. The Germans know it. The Allies know it. Even the civilians hiding in basements as armies fight through their cities know it. The only question is when? How long? How many more will die before the inevitable end? But knowing the war will be won and winning it are different things. Victory still requires decisions, choices about how to apply force, where to attack, when to pause, how to balance risk against reward, how to coordinate armies that speak different languages, follow different doctrines, serve different national interests. And in the spring of 1945, the entire Allied command structure in Europe is held together by one man's ability to balance contradictions, to make incompatible things work together, to find common ground where none should exist. Dwight Eisenhower. Not a combat commander, he has never led troops in battle, never commanded a division, never directed a corps assault. His entire career before this war was spent in staff positions, planning, coordinating, managing the unglamorous work that makes armies function. His genius lies not in tactics but in something rarer, in the ability to understand personalities, to manage egos, to keep brilliant, difficult, egotistical men working toward the same objective instead of tearing each other apart, to balance competing visions of victory. Men like Bernard Law Montgomery, 57 years old, commander of 21st Army Group, victor of El Alamein, the man who stopped Rommel in North Africa when Britain stood alone. Meticulous, methodical, vain, a man who believes wars are won through preparation, through overwhelming force applied systematically, through leaving absolutely nothing to chance. Montgomery had survived the Somme, had been there in 1916 when the British Army walked into German machine guns because someone thought overwhelming numbers would carry the day, where 400,000 British soldiers became casualties in a single offensive that gained a few miles of cratered ground, where hasty planning meant death, where improvisation meant slaughter, where the graves stretched to the horizon. That experience shaped everything Montgomery believed about warfare, burned itself into his soul, made him who he is. Plan carefully, prepare thoroughly, account for every contingency. Never move until every detail is calculated. Never take risks that can be avoided. Never waste men the way they were wasted in the trenches. It is a philosophy born of trauma, born of watching friends die because someone made a decision too quickly, because someone took a risk that did not pay off, because someone thought audacity could substitute for preparation. Montgomery will never be that someone. He will never send men to die unnecessarily. He will win through system, through method, through the application of overwhelming force that makes victory certain before the first shot is fired. And then there is George Patton, 59 years old, commander of 3rd Army, a man who believes war is not science but art, not system but inspiration, not method but genius. A man who thinks in terms of movement and speed, who sees hesitation as the greatest sin a commander can commit. Patton had been an Olympic athlete in 1912, modern pentathlon, 5th place overall, a demonstration that he could fence, shoot, swim, ride and run at world-class levels, that he could push his body beyond normal limits through sheer force of will. He had charged with Pershing's expedition into Mexico in 1916, chasing Pancho Villa, had killed men in close combat, had seen what speed and audacity could achieve against a disorganized enemy. He had led tanks in World War I, had understood immediately that this new weapon changed warfare fundamentally. That armor, plus speed, plus aggression, could achieve what infantry assaults could not, could break through, could penetrate deep, could turn stalemate into victory. His entire life had been preparation for war, not staff work, not planning. War, movement, action, speed, the application of violent force at the decisive point before the enemy could react. His philosophy is simple, almost primitive in its directness. Move faster than the enemy can think. Attack where they are weak, bypass where they are strong. Never give them time to recover. Never give them time to establish defensive positions. Never let them breathe. If they are disorganized, attack before they organize. If they are organized, disorganize them through speed. If they are retreating, pursue until they collapse. If they are defending, go around them. Speed, always speed. Speed is armor. Speed is firepower. Speed wins wars. It is a philosophy born of confidence, born of believing that the man who acts first, acts fastest, wins. Born of understanding that in warfare, tempo itself is a weapon. Two men, two philosophies, both brilliant, both proven in combat, both convinced they know the right way to win this war. And Eisenhower must use both, must balance their egos, their ambitions, their competing visions of how victory should be achieved, must somehow make them work together instead of destroying each other. Because the truth is, he needs them both. Montgomery's methodical approach grinds down German defenses, overwhelms them with superiority in numbers and firepower, secures objectives that stay secured, creates conditions for follow-on operations, minimizes casualties through careful planning. Patton's aggressive approach exploits German weaknesses, moves too fast for them to respond, creates chaos that becomes opportunity, achieves in days what methodical operations would take weeks to accomplish. Neither philosophy alone can win this war, but together, applied correctly, they might end it. Might save thousands of lives by finishing quickly what could drag on for months. The challenge is keeping them from destroying each other in the process. The challenge is managing genius without being consumed by it. March 13th, 1945, 11 days before the Rhine crossing. The Palatinate region of southwestern Germany. Schaeff intelligence briefs Eisenhower on German dispositions. Colonel Kenneth Strong, his intelligence chief, spreads maps across the conference table, points to the triangle of territory still in German hands. 14 divisions of Army Group G trapped in a pocket formed by 3 barriers. The Rhine River to the east, Germany's greatest natural obstacle, wide, fast-flowing, difficult to cross even without opposition. The Moselle River to the north, another significant water barrier. The Siegfried Line fortifications to the west, concrete bunkers, Dragon's Teeth tank obstacles, minefields. The defensive line Germany built in the 1930s to protect against French invasion. A pocket, a trap. German forces cut off from reinforcement, low on supplies, low on fuel, ammunition running short, but still dangerous, still capable of fighting. 14 divisions, even weakened divisions, still represent significant combat power. Strong's intelligence estimate projects 2 weeks to reduce the pocket. 1st Army attacking from the north, 7th Army from the south, 3rd Army driving from the west. Coordinated attacks, artillery preparation, air support, methodical clearing of one strong point after another. 2 weeks. Acceptable casualties estimated at 8 to 12,000 men. The calculation that Eisenhower has learned to make without flinching. 8 to 12,000 casualties to eliminate 14 German divisions, to clear the west bank of the Rhine, to set conditions for the crossing operations to follow. The numbers make sense. The plan is sound. It follows doctrine. It minimizes risk. Eisenhower approves it, issues the orders through the chain of command. 1st Army begins moving units into position. 7th Army coordinates with French forces. Everything proceeds according to plan, according to the principles that have guided Allied operations since Normandy. And then George Patton gets involved. March 15th, 3rd Army Staff Meeting. Patton's forward headquarters in a requisitioned German house near the border. The owner fled when American forces approached, left behind furniture, paintings, a wine cellar, the detritus of a life interrupted by war. Patton sits at the head of a dining table that once hosted family dinners. Now it hosts maps, situation reports, intelligence summaries, the organized chaos of an army headquarters that has learned to move as fast as its commander thinks. His operations officer, Colonel Halley Maddox, presents the SHAEF plan, the careful, coordinated, 2-week reduction of the Palatinate pocket. the methodical approach, the by-the-book operation. Patton listens, studies the maps. His eyes move across terrain features, roads, rivers, German positions marked in red, Allied positions in blue. His finger traces potential routes of advance, identifies weak points, strong points, key terrain. Then he looks up at his staff, at Maddox, at his intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Koch, at his logistics coordinator, at his artillery commander, at the men who have learned over 18 months how Patton thinks, how he sees opportunities where others see obstacles, how he finds ways forward where others see only problems. And Patton says one sentence: "Gentlemen, we attack everywhere at once, tomorrow. Not in 2 weeks, tomorrow. Not coordinated with 1st Army and 7th Army, independently. Not methodical reduction of strong points, all-out assault on every axis simultaneously." His staff does not question him. They stopped questioning him back in August when he broke out of Normandy and drove across France faster than anyone thought tanks could move. They stopped questioning him at Bastogne when he turned 3rd Army 90 degrees north in 48 hours and smashed into the German flank. They stopped questioning him when his predictions proved accurate more often than SHAEF intelligence estimates. They just start planning, because when Patton says attack tomorrow, he means attack tomorrow, and if it seems impossible, that just means they have not worked hard enough on the plan yet. March 16th, 0600 hours. 3rd Army attacks. Not probing attacks, not limited objective attacks, not reconnaissance in force. Full assault across the entire front. 12th Corps under Major General Manton Eddy drives toward Kaiserslautern. 20 Corps under Major General Walton Walker hits from the south. 8 Corps provides flank security and pursues bypassed German units. 4th Armoured Division. 6th Armoured Division. 11th Armoured Division. All moving simultaneously. The German defenders expect careful Allied advances, expect artillery preparation that lasts hours, expect infantry clearing positions methodically, expect time to organize defensive fires, time to request reinforcements, time to establish fallback positions. They do not get time. 3rd Army does not pause, does not consolidate gains before pushing forward, does not establish firm bases before continuing the advance. They just move. Armor punching through weak points, infantry following up, combat commands bypassing strong points, cutting supply lines, encircling positions before the defenders realize what is happening. By nightfall, March 16th, 3rd Army has penetrated 15 miles into the pocket, deeper than SHAEF projected for the entire first day. By March 18th, they have split German forces in two, cut communications, isolated units from higher headquarters. By March 20th, entire regiments are surrendering because they have no ammunition, no food, no communication with command, no idea where the Americans are or where they are going. At SHAEF headquarters in Reims, Eisenhower watches the reports come in every 6 hours, watches 3rd Army markers on the map move forward, faster than projected, deeper than planned, achieving in days what should take weeks. He tells himself, this is good. Patton is doing what Patton does, exploiting success, maintaining momentum, proving again that aggressive action produces results. But there is unease, because Patton is not just ahead of schedule, he is operating in a different reality, moving at speeds that make coordination with neighboring armies impossible, that expose flanks, that outrun supply lines, that violate every principle of methodical operations. It is brilliant. It is reckless. It is both, simultaneously. And Eisenhower knows, watching those map markers move across Germany, that at some point he is going to have to make a choice. Let Patton run and risk disaster, or rein him in and lose the opportunity his speed creates. He does not know yet that the choice will come sooner than he thinks, that it will come in the form of a phone call at 1600 hours on March 23rd, that it will force him to confront fundamental questions about leadership and genius and the impossible. March 22nd, 1945, 1800 hours, Kaiserslautern, Germany. 12th Corps attacks into the city. German 7th Army has established defensive positions in the urban terrain. Street fighting expected, house-to-house clearing operations, the kind of combat that produces high casualties even when you win. Buildings provide cover. Every window is a potential firing position, every basement a strong point. Cities favor the defender. Casualty estimates for taking Kaiserslautern run to 2,000 men, maybe more, but the city is key terrain, controls road junctions, rail lines, cannot be bypassed. General Manton Eddy, 12th Corps commander, commits his assault divisions. They push into the city outskirts expecting resistance, but when the assault troops reach the city center, they find something unexpected: white flags. Not scattered white flags from isolated units who decide surrender is better than death. Organized surrender. Company commanders leading their men out of positions, battalion commanders negotiating terms with American officers, entire regiments laying down weapons in formation. The defenders are not defeated in the conventional sense. They still have ammunition in their bunkers, they still have defensive positions prepared, they still have weapons capable of inflicting casualties, but they have lost something more fundamental than ammunition or positions. They have lost hope. They have been outmaneuvered so completely, so thoroughly, that continued resistance seems pointless. American forces are behind them, beside them, around them. Supply lines cut days ago, communication with higher headquarters lost, reinforcement impossible. The situation not just tactically difficult, but strategically hopeless. They are not surrendering to superior firepower, they are surrendering to superior speed, to the realization that the Americans are everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, that resistance will achieve nothing except more death. By 2,000 hours, 12th Corps has processed 12,000 prisoners. By 2,200 hours, 16,000. The numbers keep climbing. Officers surrender with their entire staffs. Supply units march into POW cages, still driving their trucks. Medical units bring their own wounded. Artillery batteries surrender guns that still have ammunition. At 3rd Army headquarters, Colonel Oscar Koch brings the preliminary count to Patton, reads the numbers, watches Patton's face. Patton does not grin, not yet. He is reading the situation map, seeing the implications, seeing that this is not an isolated incident. 10th Corps is reporting similar collapses to the south, entire defensive sectors disintegrating, not because they are being overrun in combat, because they cannot function in the chaos 3rd Army has created. The German army is an organization built on order, on clear chains of command, on knowing where units are, what they are doing, what the situation is, on orders flowing down from higher headquarters, on reports flowing up from the front, on a system that processes information and produces decisions. 3rd Army has shattered that order, has created a fog of war so dense that German commanders are making decisions based on information that is hours old, sometimes days old, issuing orders that are obsolete before they reach the units they are intended for. And when an army built on order loses order, it ceases to be an army. It becomes a collection of isolated units, each fighting its own battle, each making its own decisions, each coming to its own conclusion about whether continued resistance makes sense. More and more are concluding it does not. Patton looks at Koch, speaks quietly, the voice he uses when he is thinking several moves ahead, when he is seeing possibilities others have not recognized yet. Oscar, I want prisoner counts every 2 hours. I want to know exactly how many we have, where they are, what condition they're in. And I want combat commands pushing through the night. No pause, no consolidation. We keep the pressure on until there is nothing left to press against. 2,300 hours, 20. Corps Commander General Walton Walker reports his forward units have bypassed remaining German strongpoints, are approaching the Rhine River near Ludwigshafen. Resistance collapsing faster than anticipated, roads clogged with surrendering troops marching themselves to the rear because there are not enough American MPs to escort them. Midnight. The preliminary numbers come in. 12th Corps, 19,000 prisoners. 20th Corps, 14,000. 8th Corps, 3,000. Total, 36,000 prisoners, in 6 hours. And the night is not over. 200 hours, March 23rd. The military police battalions responsible for processing prisoners send an urgent request to 3rd Army headquarters. They have run out of barbed wire, completely exhausted. Every role allocated to 3rd Army operations for the month of March, used in one night. They are improvising now, using communications wire to create makeshift fences, using captured German materials, using anything they can find. Prisoners are being held in warehouses, in open fields surrounded by guards, in improvised compounds that violate Geneva Convention standards for space and sanitation. Some prisoners are organizing themselves. German NCOs maintaining order within the compounds because there are not enough American guards to manage them properly, cooking their own food from captured rations, posting their own sentries to prevent escapes, creating a bizarre situation where the prisoners are more organized than their captors. At 0600 hours, March 23rd, Colonel Koch brings the final count to Patton, 50,127. Patton stares at the number, reads the breakdown by corps, looks at the map showing 3rd Army positions now reaching the Rhine River. The Palatinate pocket that Schaeff projected would take 2 weeks to clear. Cleared in 3 days, he picks up the secure telephone, direct line to 12th Army Group headquarters in Namur, to General Omar Bradley, his immediate superior in the chain of command, his old friend from West Point, where they were cadets together 25 years ago. The man responsible for coordinating 3 American armies, 1st Army, 3rd Army, 9th Army. The phone rings 3 times before Bradley answers. His voice is thick with sleep, groggy. "George, it is 2 in the morning. This better be important. What did you do now?" Patton's voice carries that particular tone Bradley has learned to recognize over years of friendship. The tone that says something impossible has happened, and Patton is not apologizing for it. The tone that means Bradley's day just got much more complicated. "Omar, you are not going to believe this, but I need you to relay something to Ike as soon as he wakes up. We have taken 50,000 prisoners since yesterday evening at 1800 hours. We are still counting. And we need 90 miles of barbed wire, immediately, emergency priority." Silence on the line. Long silence. Bradley processing what he just heard. 50,000 in less than 12 hours. Then Bradley's voice, more awake now, more alert. The tone of a man realizing he's about to be in the middle of something unprecedented. 50,000? George, are you absolutely certain? 50,000 prisoners. 12th Corps, 28,000. 20th Corps, 22,000. The numbers are solid. We have them in cages right now. Well, not exactly cages. We ran out of fencing. That is why we need the wire, Omar. We have prisoners organizing their own camps because we do not have enough guards. The Red Cross is going to have questions about Geneva Convention compliance if we do not get this under control. I will call Schaeff first thing. And George? Ike is going to want to talk to you about this, personally. I am available whenever the Supreme Commander wishes to call. Patton hangs up, looks at his staff, at Maddox, at Koch, at the operations map showing their forward positions reaching the Rhine, at the opportunities that speed has created. Then he grins, that famous Patton grin that his men know. That means the general is about to do something that will make staff officers scream and historians argue for decades. "Gentlemen, while we wait for Schaeff to process the paperwork on 50,000 Germans, we have an opportunity. The Rhine is 12 miles away. Our armor is already moving up. Resistance is non-existent. I do not intend to pause at the river. I intend to cross it." Colonel Maddox looks at the map, looks back at Patton, knows what question needs to be asked, even though he knows what the answer will be. Has to ask it anyway because protocols exist for reasons. "Sir, should we request authorization from Schaeff first?" Patton's grin widens. "Colonel, by the time authorization arrives, we will already be on the other side. Find me assault boats, find me a crossing site the Germans are not watching, and tell 11th Armored Division I want them across the Rhine by midnight tonight." March 23rd, 1945, 0630 hours. Schaeff headquarters, Reims. Eisenhower's office. The phone call from Bradley came 20 minutes ago, woke Eisenhower from a restless sleep on the couch in his office, where he often spends nights when operations are critical. Bradley explained the situation: the prisoner count, the barbed wire crisis, the impossible speed of Third Army's advance. Now Eisenhower sits at his desk, smoking his 6th cigarette of the morning, staring at that single sheet of paper. The POW report, the number that makes no sense according to everything he knows about warfare. 50,000 prisoners in one night. He pulls over another document, the March 20th intelligence summary from 21st Army Group, Field Marshal Montgomery's command in the north. The summary details Operation Plunder statistics: 47,000 German prisoners captured by 21st Army Group over the past 4 weeks. 4 weeks of operations across a broad front. 8 divisions engaged in combat. Careful, methodical advances, following the principles Montgomery learned in the trenches of World War I. 47,000 prisoners total, in 4 weeks. Patton just exceeded that in 18 hours, with 6 divisions. The comparison is not entirely fair. Eisenhower knows this. Montgomery faced better equipped, better led German units in the north. His operations included clearing heavily fortified positions along the Siegfried Line. The strategic situation was different. The tactical challenges were different, but the numbers are the numbers, and the numbers are impossible, or should be impossible, except they are real. Eisenhower looks at Bedell Smith. The man has been standing silently by the window, giving his commander time to process, time to think through implications. "Get me Third Army on the line." Smith nods, leaves the office, returns 5 minutes later. "General Patton is on the secure line, sir." Eisenhower picks up the receiver, takes a breath, keeps his voice calm, controlled, the voice he has cultivated over 3 years of dealing with difficult subordinates, the voice that does not reveal what he is thinking. "George, I am looking at a report that says you took 50,000 prisoners without requesting additional POW processing units, without coordinating with Army Group logistics, without informing SHAEF of the scope of your operations. Care to explain?" There is a pause on the line. Then Patton's voice comes through, confident, unapologetic, carrying that slight edge of amusement that drives Eisenhower to distraction, because it means Patton knows exactly how much chaos he is creating and does not care. "Well, sir, the Germans kept surrendering. Could not very well tell them to come back tomorrow when the paperwork cleared." "This is not a joke, George." "Was not joking, sir. 12th Corps broke through at Kaiserslautern at 1800 hours yesterday. 20th Corps hit them from the south simultaneously. They collapsed faster than we expected. By midnight, we had entire regiments surrendering without firing a shot. Some of them were marching themselves to the rear because we did not have enough military police to escort them. They wanted to surrender. We just had to figure out where to put them." Eisenhower closes his eyes, pinches the bridge of his nose. He can picture it perfectly. Patton's armor punching through weak points in the German line, infantry following up immediately, combat commands bypassing strong points, cutting supply lines, encircling positions, creating chaos that became collapse. The Third Army steamroller doing what it does best, moving so fast the enemy cannot react, cannot organize, cannot function. "George, Montgomery spent a month preparing Operation Plunder. Massive artillery support, airborne drops, 2 divisions. He is taking the Rhine crossing methodically, by the book, with every resource we can give him. Churchill is going to be there tomorrow watching." This was supposed to be the official Allied Rhine crossing. The moment we demonstrate that Germany has lost its last natural barrier. There is a pause on the line. Longer this time. Then Patton's voice, quieter now, but carrying a weight that makes Eisenhower's stomach tighten with the certainty that something else has happened. Something Patton has not mentioned yet. "And I crossed it last night, Ike. 11th Armored Division. 22:30 hours. Assault boats at Oppenheim. Did not lose a man. Should have that report on your desk by morning." Silence. Complete silence. Total silence on the line. Bedell Smith, standing by the window, stops moving, freezes. He is staring at Eisenhower. watching his commander's face process what Patton just said. Eisenhower's voice, when it finally comes, is very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that is more dangerous than shouting. You crossed the Rhine.
When exactly were you planning to tell me?
I am telling you now, sir. 11th Armored Division under Brigadier General Charles Kilburn. 2,230 hours last night. Assault boats we requisitioned from Navy stocks. South of Mainz at the Oppenheim crossing site. Barely any opposition, a few scattered shots. The Germans were not expecting us there. We are 6 miles deep on the east bank already, consolidating the bridgehead. Engineers are throwing up pontoon bridges now. Frankfurt is within reach. George, Eisenhower's hand tightens on the receiver. George, you are going to give me a heart attack. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force allocated months of planning and massive resources to Montgomery's crossing. We coordinated with Churchill, with the War Department, with the combined Chiefs of Staff. This was supposed to be the official Allied Rhine crossing, the symbolic moment.
And you just decided to freelance with assault boats?
Ike, every hour we wait is an hour the Germans use to regroup. I had the momentum from the Palatinate operation. I had troops at the river. I had the boats. I had intelligence that Oppenheim was lightly defended. I took the shot. If I had waited for authorization, if I had coordinated through channels, the Germans would have reinforced the east bank, and we would have lost men we did not need to lose. Speed saved lives, Ike. There is logic in that. Eisenhower knows it, hates that he knows it. Patton is reckless, yes. Insubordinate, absolutely. Creates diplomatic nightmares. Makes coordination with allies nearly impossible. But he is also right more often than he is wrong. And when Patton is right, he is devastatingly effective. The problem is not whether Patton's crossing will succeed. It already has succeeded. The problem is Montgomery. The problem is Churchill. The problem is that the British have been preparing Operation Plunder as their triumphant moment, their demonstration of how major river crossings should be conducted. Methodical, overwhelming, certain. And Patton just stole their thunder with assault boats and no preparation. We will discuss this when you get back to headquarters. Until then, George, try not to capture the entire Wehrmacht without telling anyone. Understood? Understood, sir. The line goes dead. Patton has hung up. Does not wait for formal dismissal. Does not ask if there is anything else. Just hangs up and gets back to work. Eisenhower sets down the receiver carefully. Looks at Smith. Bedell, notify Army Group commanders. 3rd Army has crossed the Rhine. Unauthorized. Successful. No casualties reported. Montgomery is going to love this. Smith's expression does not change, but there is something in his eyes. Something that might be amusement, might be admiration, might be the recognition that they are watching something unprecedented unfold. Yes, sir. I will draft the message very carefully. March 23rd, 1945. 0800 hours. 21st Army Group Headquarters, Venlo, Netherlands. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery stands in his personal command caravan. 57 years old, thin, almost gaunt, every uniform crease precise, every map annotation exact. A man who believes that disorder in small things leads to disaster in large things, that discipline begins with appearance, that standards matter. On the table before him lies the operations order for plunder. 73 pages, single-spaced, every detail calculated down to the last truck, the last artillery shell, the last ration pack, every contingency planned for, every possible German response analyzed and countered, unit assembly areas mapped to the meter, artillery fire schedules accurate to the minute, air support coordinated to the second. Nothing left to chance. Because chance kills men. Improvisation kills men. Hasty decisions kill men. Montgomery learned that at the Somme in 1916, watched it happen, lived through it, will never forget it. 3 weeks of preparation for this moment. 3 weeks of moving units into position, stockpiling ammunition, positioning artillery, rehearsing assaults, studying aerial photographs, updating intelligence estimates, building the overwhelming force that makes victory certain before the first shot is fired. 80,000 men, 3,500 artillery pieces, 2 airborne divisions, the largest Rhine crossing operation of the war, the moment when the British Empire demonstrates to the world that it knows how to conduct major military operations, that British thoroughness produces British victories. His intelligence officer enters the caravan, Captain James Henderson. Young, efficient, knows better than to interrupt the field marshal without good reason. Henderson salutes,
Places a message flimsy on the desk.
Sir, from Schaeff. 3rd Army Operations Summary, March 22nd to 23rd. Montgomery picks it up, reads it. His expression does not change. He is a master of control, has learned over years of command never to show emotion, never to let subordinates see surprise or anger or doubt. But those who know him well can see the signs, the slight tightening around his eyes, the minute pause before he sets the paper down, the way his finger taps once on the desk, just once. 3rd Army crossed the Rhine last night. Assault boats, night crossing. No preliminary bombardment, no massive artillery preparation, no airborne support, just boats and infantry and audacity. Already 6 miles deep on the east bank. Montgomery picks up his pen, writes carefully on a message form. Precise handwriting, each letter formed exactly as it should be. To Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, from 21 Army Group. Request immediate clarification. 3rd Army operations must not interfere with Operation Plunder timeline. Coordinated Allied advance essential for strategic success. Recommend immediate clarification of command boundaries and operational objectives. Montgomery. His Chief of Staff, Major General Freddie de Guingand, reads it over his shoulder, understands the subtext immediately, has worked with Montgomery long enough to read between the lines. Translation: tell Patton to stop making me look slow. The message is encrypted, transmitted at 0830 hours. At Schaeff headquarters in Reims, Bedell Smith receives it, reads it to Eisenhower. Eisenhower sighs, a long, deep sigh that comes from somewhere in his soul. This is the part of Supreme Command no one talks about. Not the grand strategy, not the brilliant maneuvers, not the decisive battles. The ego management, the personality conflicts, keeping brilliant but difficult men working toward the same goal instead of competing with each other. Instead of letting professional rivalry undermine military effectiveness. Draft a response, Eisenhower says. Assure Montgomery that Operation Plunder remains the main effort, that 3rd Army's crossing is a supporting operation, that both crossings are necessary and complementary. Emphasize coordination. He pauses, looks at the map on his wall, at Patton's bridgehead already deeper into Germany than Plunder's objectives. Especially emphasize coordination because of that. Monty needs to know his operation matters, and it does. We need multiple crossings along the Rhine. We need the bridgehead in the north as much as the bridgehead in the south. Both are essential to the final offensive into Germany. Smith nods, starts drafting, choosing words carefully, trying to acknowledge Patton's achievement without diminishing Montgomery's operation, trying to make both men feel valued, trying to keep the alliance from fracturing over wounded pride. But even as he writes the careful diplomatic language, both men know the truth, know what will be remembered. Patton has changed the narrative. Operation Plunder was supposed to be the story, the great set-piece crossing, the moment the Allies broke Germany's last natural barrier with overwhelming force and meticulous preparation, the triumph of British military professionalism. Now, it will be remembered as the crossing that came after Patton already crossed. The second crossing, the one that followed the audacious American assault boat operation. History is written by the swift as much as by the victorious. March 23, 1945, 1400 hours. 3rd Army Forward Headquarters, Ida Oberstein, Germany. Patton stands over a map table in the dining room of another requisitioned house, ivory-handled pistol on his hip. Not for show, he can shoot. Olympic-level marksman. The pistol is functional, has been fired in combat, will be fired again if necessary. His eyes move across terrain features marked on the map. Roads, rivers, cities. German defensive positions marked in red, 3rd Army positions in blue. He is not looking at where his army is, he is looking at where it will be, where it should be, where it must be to maintain momentum. Colonel Halley Maddox, operations officer, briefs the current situation. 4th Armored Division under Major General Hugh Gaffey is consolidating the Oppenheim bridgehead, securing the crossing sites, establishing defensive positions against possible German counterattack. 11th Armored under Brigadier General Charles Kilburn is expanding eastward,
pushing deeper into German territory.
Infantry divisions are crossing now on pontoon bridges that engineers completed at dawn. Casualties? Patton asks without looking up from the map. 16 wounded during the Rhine crossing, sir. No killed in action. The Germans were not expecting us at Oppenheim. Most of the defending troops were second-line units, old men and boys. They surrendered immediately when they realized Americans were across. Patton nods. His eyes are still on the map, but not on the Rhine anymore, on Frankfurt, on the main river 30 miles beyond their current positions, on the routes toward the heart of Germany, toward Nuremberg, Munich, Czechoslovakia. The Rhine was not the objective, it was an obstacle. Now it is behind them. Gentlemen, he says quietly. His staff leans in, knows that when Patton speaks quietly, he is thinking strategically, seeing the whole board. We have them. Right now, at this moment, we have the German army on the run in this sector.
Every hour we maintain this momentum is an hour they cannot use to establish new defensive lines, cannot use to bring up reserves, cannot use to organize counterattacks. He looks up, meets their eyes. I do not care if we are ahead of schedule. I do not care if Schaeff has not caught up to what we are doing. I do not care if logistics is complaining. We keep moving forward until someone with more stars than me orders us to stop. He pauses, the ghost of a smile, and maybe not even then. Someone asks about casualties, about the risks of moving too fast, about exposed flanks that extend for miles, about supply lines stretched so thin that forward units are operating on captured German fuel and rations. Patton's answer comes without hesitation. We are taking fewer casualties moving fast than we would taking our time. When we move faster than the enemy can react, when we are behind them before they establish defensive positions, we do not have to assault prepared defenses. They surrender instead of fighting. You saw it at Kaiserslautern.
You are seeing it now at the Rhine. Speed saves lives. He is right. The staff knows he is right. Third Army's casualty rates during this offensive are running well below Schaeff projections. The actuarial calculations that predicted thousands of dead are not matching reality. Because Patton's tactics avoid the grinding attritional battles that produce mass casualties. German units surrounded by fast-moving armor tend to surrender rather than fight to the last man. Cities bypassed rather than assaulted do not produce street-fighting casualties. Speed creates opportunities for victory without bloodshed.
March 24th, 1945, 0900 hours.
The Rhine River near Wesel, Germany. Operation Plunder begins. Artillery opens fire at exactly 0900 hours. 3,500 guns. Coordinated fire plan. The sound is apocalyptic. A continuous roar that can be heard for 50 miles. That shakes the ground, that makes the air vibrate. Shells arc across the Rhine, hammer German positions on the east bank. Suppression fire, destruction fire, counter-battery fire, targeting German artillery that might fire on the crossing. The overwhelming application of firepower that is Montgomery's signature, the demonstration that the British Empire can bring to bear resources that dwarf anything the Germans can match. At 1,000 hours, assault boats push into the water. Commandos, infantry, specialized assault units trained for river crossings. British Second Army, Canadian First Army, American Ninth Army temporarily attached to Montgomery's command for this operation.
80,000 men crossing on a front 30 miles wide.
German defensive fire is sporadic, disorganized. Most of the defending troops are remnants of divisions destroyed in earlier fighting. Old men conscripted in the final desperate months. Boys who should be in school. They fight because they are told to fight, because their officers tell them the fatherland depends on them. But their hearts are not in it. By 1400 hours, Montgomery's forces have secured multiple bridgeheads on the east bank. By 1600 hours,
Engineers are constructing pontoon bridges, laying matting for vehicles, creating the infrastructure for exploitation. By nightfall, armor is crossing, tanks rolling east into Germany. At 1500 hours, the sky fills with aircraft, transport planes, gliders, 2 airborne divisions dropping behind German lines. American 82nd Airborne, British 6th Airborne, 17,000 paratroopers and glider troops, the largest single-day airborne operation since D-Day. From an observation post on the West Bank, Winston Churchill watches through binoculars. 70 years old, Prime Minister of the British Empire, the man who held Britain together through 1940 when it stood alone against Nazi Germany, who refused to surrender when surrender seemed rational, who believed that Britain could and would prevail. He watches the paratroopers descend, watches the assault boats ferry men across the river, watches artillery pound German positions into rubble. It is magnificent, overwhelming, everything a military operation should be. The demonstration of British power, British competence, British determination. Then Montgomery's aide mentions, carefully, that the Americans crossed 2 days ago, at Oppenheim, with assault boats. Churchill lowers his binoculars, turns to Montgomery. His expression is unreadable. Could be anger, could be amusement. With Churchill, it is often impossible to tell until he speaks. Is this true, Bernard? Yes, Prime Minister. General Patton conducted an unauthorized crossing south of Mainz on the evening of March 22nd. Unauthorized. He did not coordinate with Supreme Headquarters, did not inform neighboring armies, did not request the supporting resources that proper planning would have allocated. Churchill processes this, processes the implications, that while Montgomery spent 3 weeks preparing this magnificent operation, Patton just did it, grabbed boats and crossed, no fuss, no planning, no coordination. Then Churchill does something that surprises everyone watching. He smiles. A big, genuine Winston Churchill smile. The smile that appears when he appreciates audacity, when he recognizes the kind of bold action that changes outcomes. "Gentlemen," he says, voice carrying across the observation post, "it appears the Americans have stolen a march on us. How very enterprising of General Patton." He turns to Montgomery, places a hand on his shoulder. "Bernard, I suggest we ensure that Operation Plunder is executed with such overwhelming success that no one remembers who crossed first. They may have crossed in boats. We shall cross with the entire weight of the British Empire behind us." It is a diplomatic masterpiece, acknowledging Patton's achievement while reframing plunder as the more significant operation, turning potential embarrassment into motivation. Churchill understands what Eisenhower understands. This is not a competition between allies. This is a war against Germany. And right now, the allies are winning. But that does not stop Montgomery from sending another message to Schaeff that evening. More carefully worded this time, requesting clarification on whether Third Army's advance might be moving too fast for proper coordination with neighboring forces, whether some guidance on operational boundaries might be appropriate, whether someone might consider telling George Patton to slow down. Eisenhower reads it, hands it to Smith without comment. "Bedell, what is the diplomatic way to say, 'let Patton run'?" Smith considers for a moment. "I will think of something, sir." March 25th, 1945. 1,000 hours. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, Operations Room. The situation map covers an entire wall, Europe from the English Channel to the Oder River. Color-coded unit symbols, red for Germans, blue for Americans, purple for British, orange for French, green for Canadians. The map is updated every 6 hours with the latest unit positions reported through military channels. This morning, the operations staff updating Third Army's markers encounter a problem. Second Lieutenant James Morrison, fresh from West Point, approaches Major Thomas Crawford, the duty officer. "Sir, I cannot confirm these positions. According to this morning's report, 4th Armored Division is at Frankfurt, but yesterday they were 30 miles west. That is impossible to cover in 24 hours.
not with opposition, not with the need to secure supply lines. Major Crawford has been doing this job for 8 months,
has learned that when Third Army is involved, the word impossible requires redefining. He checks the radio logs, reads the position reports carefully, cross-references with yesterday's map, runs the calculations. Lieutenant Morrison is correct according to conventional military planning. 4th Armored Division, covering 30 miles in 24 hours while engaged in combat operations, should not be possible. Except the reports are accurate. 4th Armored Division is at Frankfurt. 12th Corps is at Wiesbaden. 20th Corps has taken Darmstadt. 3rd Army is advancing faster than the map can track. Update the markers, Crawford says. Annotate them as estimated positions pending confirmation. We will clarify when the next report comes in. By the time the next report comes in 4 hours later, the positions have changed again. 4th Armored has pushed beyond Frankfurt. 12th Corps is crossing the main river. 10th Corps is engaging German units attempting to establish a defensive line and watching them dissolve before contact. The operations staff start updating 3rd Army's positions every 4 hours instead of 6, then every 2 hours when they realize even 4-hour intervals cannot keep pace. They still cannot keep up. By the time they mark where 3rd Army is on the map, Patton's units have already moved beyond it. The blue markers become approximations, best guesses, estimates of where 3rd Army probably is based on last known positions and projected rates of advance. It is unprecedented in this war. German resistance in 3rd Army's sector is not just collapsing, it is ceasing to exist as a coherent entity. Entire regiments surrendering, not because they are being defeated in battle, but because by the time they receive orders to defend a position, American tanks are already past them, already behind them, already cutting their supply lines. At 21st Army Group Headquarters, Captain Henderson brings Montgomery a report from the British liaison officer attached to 3rd Army Headquarters. Sir, 3rd Army as of this morning is 13 days ahead of the SHAEF operational timeline. Montgomery reads it, sets it down without comment, returns to planning Operation Plunder's follow-up operations. The methodical exploitation of the bridgehead, the careful advance that will secure objectives systematically. If Patton is going to ignore schedules and timelines, Montgomery will ensure British forces execute their operations flawlessly, will demonstrate that there is more than one way to win a war, that speed without method eventually leads to disaster, that shortcuts produce vulnerabilities. He does not say any of this aloud, does not need to. His staff understands. The Field Marshal believes in his method, has proven it works, will continue to apply it regardless of what the Americans do. March 26, 1945. 3rd Army Forward Headquarters. Colonel Oscar Koch brings the latest prisoner count to Patton, has been bringing these counts every few hours as ordered, watching the numbers climb to levels that defy belief. Sir, as of 1200 hours today, total prisoners captured since March 22nd, 91,000. 91,000. Koch continues reading the breakdown. 12th Corps 41,000, 20th Corps 33,000, 8th Corps 17,000. Sir, we have captured more prisoners in 4 days than any Allied army has captured in any comparable period during this entire war. He pauses, looks at Patton. We have captured more prisoners than the entire German garrison of Stalingrad surrendered to the Soviets. Patton studies the map. The prisoner statistics are impressive, will make good press, will look excellent in the after-action reports. But his mind is already 3 moves ahead. Oscar, send a message to General Bradley. Tell him if he can get me enough gasoline, I will have 3rd Army in Berlin in 48 hours. Koch hesitates, has learned when to push back, when to remind his commander of realities that enthusiasm sometimes overlooks. Sir, should we coordinate with SHAEF first? Berlin is in the Soviet zone of occupation. We have agreements with the Russians about boundaries. Send the message, Oscar. Politics is Ike's problem. Winning the war is mine. The message goes to 12th Army Group Headquarters in Namur. General Omar Bradley reads it, shakes his head, has known Patton for 25 years, knows the man is serious, knows that if given fuel and authorization, Patton would drive to Berlin, would get there, would create a political crisis that would take months to resolve. Bradley picks up the phone, calls Eisenhower. "Ike, I have officially given up trying to control George. I just call him every morning to find out where he is. Yesterday he was supposed to be consolidating the Rhine bridgehead. Today he wants to go to Berlin. Tomorrow he will probably liberate Prague and invade Austria simultaneously." Eisenhower, on the other end of the line, does not laugh, is too tired to laugh, has been dealing with messages from Montgomery, from Churchill, from Washington, all asking variations of the same question. What is Patton doing, and when will someone make him stop? Brad, is he achieving the objectives we assigned him? He is achieving objectives we have not assigned him yet, objectives we were planning to assign 2 weeks from now. He is operating in the future, while the rest of us are stuck in the present. Then let him keep operating there, but make absolutely certain someone is documenting everything he does, every decision, every movement, every tactical innovation, because when this war is over, we are going to need to understand how he did this. Bradley pauses. Here's something in Eisenhower's voice. Not frustration, something else. Curiosity, maybe even admiration. And if it goes wrong, if he moves too fast and gets cut off, then we will need to understand that even more carefully. But Brad, look at the numbers. 91,000 prisoners in 4 days. Frankfurt captured, Main River crossed, and his casualty rates are lower than our projections. Whatever he is doing, it is working. Bradley hangs up, looks at his Chief of Staff, Major General Levin Allen. Make sure 3rd Army has first priority on all fuel shipments, and start drafting detailed after-action reports. I want every engagement documented, every decision recorded, because nobody is going to believe this happened when we tell them about it after the war. March 26, 1945, 1400 hours. Army Group G headquarters, somewhere in southern Germany. General Hermann Balck sits at a desk in a bunker, 56 years old, one of Germany's most skilled commanders. Veteran of both world wars, has fought the French, the British, the Soviets, knows what good armies look like, knows what skilled commanders do, has never seen anything like this. On March 26th, he issues orders to establish a defensive line along the Main River. 3 divisions, hold the river crossings, deny the Americans bridgeheads, buy time for Army Group B to withdraw from the Ruhr before it gets encircled. The orders are clear, detailed, based on sound military logic. If the divisions can hold the Main even for 48 hours, it will allow other German forces to escape encirclement. The orders are transmitted at 0900 hours, sent through proper channels, encoded, relayed to division headquarters, acknowledged as received. By 1100 hours, when the orders actually reach the forward combat units, American tanks are already across the Main River. The defensive line Balck tried to create exists only on his map, not in reality. He sits in his headquarters, stares at the map that no longer represents the actual situation. At reports coming in that are hours old by the time he reads them. At a command and control system that is supposed to process information and generate responses, but cannot function when the enemy moves faster than the system can process. After the war, sitting in an Allied interrogation center, Balck will describe the experience to American intelligence officers who are trying to understand how 3rd Army achieved what it achieved. We could not understand Patton's speed. Our doctrine, which had worked against every other Allied army, called for consolidation after major operations. After crossing a river, an army rests, resupplies, brings up artillery, prepares for the next phase. This takes time, usually days, sometimes weeks. He pauses, searches for words to describe something that defies conventional military logic. Patton simply never stopped, never paused, never consolidated. By the time we received orders to establish a defensive line, his tanks were already behind that line. We were issuing orders to defend positions his forces had already bypassed. It was like fighting a forest fire in a high wind. Everywhere we tried to contain it, it had already spread beyond our control. The interrogating officer asks how German forces responded. Bauck's answer is simple: devastating. They surrendered, not because they were defeated in combat, because combat had become pointless. When you receive an order to defend a river crossing, and American tanks are already 10 miles east of that river, what purpose does defense serve? You cannot affect the outcome. You can only die for no reason. Another German officer, Colonel Friedrich von Broich, interviewed separately, describes it differently. Patton did not fight us in the conventional sense. He overran us. There is a difference. When armies fight, there is contact, engagement, battle. What Patton did was more like a flood. We tried to build barriers, but by the time we built them, the flood had already passed, was already miles beyond us. We were defending against something that was no longer there. March 27, 1945, 1800 hours. A small office in the Soviet Embassy complex, Paris. Colonel Andrei Volkov sits at his desk writing a report. 43 years old, Soviet liaison officer to Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. His official role is coordination. His actual role is intelligence gathering. Moscow wants to know everything about Allied operations, everything about American capabilities, everything about how the Western democracies fight, because the alliance against Germany will not last forever. And when it ends, the Soviet Union needs to know what it will face. Volkov writes in Russian, precise military terminology, facts without embellishment. His report will be encrypted, transmitted to Moscow, analyzed by Soviet General Staff Intelligence. American Third Army under General George S. Patton, advancing at operational tempos comparable to 1944 Soviet operations during Bagration Offensive against Army Group Center. Palatinate Pocket reduced in 72 hours. 91,000 prisoners captured in 5 days. Rhine River crossed without preliminary artillery bombardment. Main River crossed 48 hours later. German forces in southern sector surrendering before contact due to speed of American advance. He pauses, considers what he is writing. The implications for Soviet military theory. Recommend detailed study of Third Army operational methods for incorporation into future Soviet doctrine. General Patton appears to understand deep operations at highest theoretical level. His use of armored forces to penetrate deep into enemy rear areas and create cascading failures in enemy command and control systems mirrors Soviet deep battle theory developed in 1930s. Another pause. This part is more difficult to write. Requires acknowledging that an ideological enemy might have innovations worth studying. However, General Patton's operational tempo exceeds standard Soviet norms for sustained operations. His ability to maintain speed while managing logistics and command and control represents potential advancement of deep battle theory. Recommend priority intelligence collection on Third Army methods, particularly fuel logistics and decision-making processes that enable sustained high-tempo operations. The report is encrypted using current Soviet codes, transmitted through secure channels, received in Moscow within 6 hours. 3 days later, a priority message returns from Soviet General Staff Headquarters. Provide all available intelligence on American General George Smith Patton. Personal history, military education, theoretical writings if any, operational methods, decision-making processes, logistics systems, highest collection priority. Report directly to Marshal Zhukov's staff. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the Soviet Union's most successful commander. The man who defended Moscow, broke the siege of Leningrad, won at Stalingrad, destroyed Army Group Center at Bagration. The architect of Soviet operational art. Zhukov wants to know about Patton, the Red Army, which pioneered deep operations doctrine, which perfected operational maneuver warfare against the Wehrmacht, is impressed by an American general's speed. That is how unprecedented Third Army's operations are. That is how fast Patton is moving. March 28, 1945. Third Army has now advanced 87 miles beyond the Rhine in 6 days. 93,000 prisoners captured, 1,400 German vehicles destroyed or captured, and Third Army's forward elements are threatening to complete the encirclement of the entire German Army Group B trapped in the Ruhr industrial region. An Operation SHAAF planning projected would require 6 weeks of sustained offensive operations involving multiple armies. Patton has created the conditions for encirclement in 1 week with one army. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, General John C. H. Lee arrives at Eisenhower's office with a stack of reports and an expression that mingles frustration with reluctant admiration. Lee is the man responsible for logistics, for keeping 9 Allied armies supplied with everything they need to fight: fuel, ammunition, food, medical supplies, spare parts. The invisible machinery that makes modern warfare possible. Lee spreads charts across Eisenhower's desk. Red ink dominates. Third Army operations running over budget on every category. Sir, Third Army has consumed 110% of its allocated fuel for March. They exceeded their allocation on March 26th and have been operating on emergency reserves since. They have exceeded ammunition allotments by 40%. They are requisitioning rations from First Army depots without going through proper channels. And, according to this morning's report, they have captured so many German vehicles that they are using enemy trucks to transport American supplies. Eisenhower studies the charts. The red ink that should concern him, the violations of allocation systems that should result in operations grinding to a halt. General Lee, let me ask you a question. Is Third Army's advance working? Are they achieving their objectives? Lee hesitates, has come here to complain about violations of logistics protocols, about systems being circumvented, about procedures being ignored. But the question forces him to confront a different reality. Sir, they are advancing so fast that our supply convoys cannot keep up with them. Our trucks are designed to support forces that consolidate positions, that establish firm bases, that pause to resupply. Third Army does not pause. They capture German supply depots and immediately distribute captured fuel to their tank battalions. They are literally running their army off enemy logistics. But is it working? Lee looks down at his charts, looks back up at Eisenhower. Perfectly, sir, which somehow makes it more frustrating. According to every logistics manual I studied at the Command and General Staff College, Third Army should have ground to a halt on March 24th, when they exceeded their fuel allocation. But they just kept moving, kept capturing German fuel dumps, kept operating. How much fuel are we saving through Patton's methods? Lee pulls out a preliminary analysis his staff completed this morning. Estimated 2.1 million gallons over the past 2 weeks, sir. Additionally, by using captured German trucks for local supply distribution, Third Army has freed up approximately 3 weeks of American transportation capacity that we have been able to redirect to other armies. Eisenhower processes this. Patton is not just violating logistics protocols, he is making the enemy supply American operations, is turning German resources into Allied assets, is operating inside German supply lines and using them. Then let him continue. But General Lee, I want everything he is doing documented, every improvisation, every captured supply dump, every tactical decision. Because when this war ends, we need to understand how he achieved this. We need to codify it, turn it into doctrine. Lee nods, gathers his charts, pauses at the door. Sir, for the record, what General Patton is doing should not be possible. Every principle of military logistics says it should not work, but it does. I do not understand how, but it does. After Lee leaves, Eisenhower sits alone with his maps, his charts, his reports showing Third Army 90 miles beyond the Rhine, 13 days ahead of schedule, operating on captured supplies, moving faster than planning cycles can track, and George Patton has stopped answering his phone. March 29th, 1945, 0900 hours. Schaeff has been trying to reach Third Army headquarters for 6 hours. The communication systems are functional, radio nets operational, telephone lines open. But Patton is not responding to calls from higher headquarters. His staff answers, takes messages, promises the general will call back when he returns, but does not specify when that will be or where he currently is. Bradley phones Eisenhower at 0930 hours. Ike, I have lost contact with George again. Third Army Operations reports they captured Frankfurt at dawn this morning. 4th Armored Division is in the city centre, but Patton is not at headquarters, not answering radio calls. My liaison officer thinks he went forward with the assault elements to be present when Frankfurt fell. Eisenhower closes his eyes, rubs his temples. Of course, Patton went forward. The man is 59 years old, a lieutenant general, commander of an army of 250,000 men, and he is probably riding in the lead tank into Frankfurt, because that is who George Patton is, cannot resist being present at the moment of victory. Brad, when he surfaces, tell him to call me immediately. Not when convenient, not when he finishes whatever he is doing, immediately. Understood, Ike, assuming he does not get himself shot first. Eisenhower hangs up, stares at the situation map, at Frankfurt, at Third Army's positions spreading across southern Germany like an ink blot on paper, and makes a decision. Bedell, arrange a flight to Frankfurt. I am going to see this for myself. Smith looks up from his desk. Sir, Frankfurt was captured this morning. The city is not secure yet. There could still be German forces. Then we will land after it is secure, which, knowing George, will probably be by the time we arrive. Make the arrangements. Smith nods, knows better than to argue when his commander has made up his mind, starts coordinating with the Air Transport Command. Eisenhower walks to the window, looks out at Reims, at the city that has become the nerve center of Allied operations in Europe, thinks about the two philosophies of war that are both succeeding, Montgomery's careful preparation, Patton's audacious execution, both working, both necessary, both producing results, but only one making the impossible routine. He needs to see it for himself, needs to understand it. Because when this war is over, when the histories are written, when future officers study these campaigns, they need to understand that victory came not from one method, but from the ability to use contradictory methods simultaneously. They need to understand that leadership is not choosing between system and genius. It is using both when the moment demands it. March 29th, 1945. 14:30 hours. A C-47 transport aircraft climbs through spring clouds over eastern France. The interior is Spartanly functional. Canvas seats along the fuselage walls, exposed aluminum ribbing, small windows, the smell of aviation fuel and hydraulic fluid. No amenities, no comfort. This is a workhorse aircraft, built to carry paratroopers into combat. Today, it carries the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe to a city that was enemy territory 12 hours ago. General Dwight David Eisenhower sits in one of the canvas seats, does not sleep, cannot sleep, though he has barely slept in 3 days. His mind works through the problem of George Patton the way a mathematician works through a complex equation, trying to understand not just what happened, but how it happened, why it worked when conventional wisdom says it should not. 50,000 prisoners in 18 hours, Rhine crossing without authorization, Frankfurt captured, 93,000 prisoners total in 1 week, advancing faster than planning cycles can accommodate, operating on captured enemy supplies. The numbers are impossible, yet they are real, verified, undeniable. Bedell Smith sits across from him in silence, knows his commander needs quiet to think, has learned over 3 years when to speak and when to simply be present. Eisenhower's mind drifts across 3 years of war, 3 years of managing George Patton, of protecting him, enabling him, restraining him, the constant balancing act between genius and chaos. Sicily, July 1943, Patton commanding 7th Army, racing Montgomery to Messina, winning the race, then slapping 2 soldiers suffering from combat fatigue, calling them cowards. The incident that exploded across American newspapers, that senators demanded he be court-martialed for, that nearly ended his career. Eisenhower had to decide then, send Patton home in disgrace or protect him despite the outrage, despite the political pressure, despite his own anger at Patton's lack of judgment. He protected him, reprimanded him privately, made him apologize publicly, but kept him in command. Because even then, Eisenhower understood something fundamental. Great commanders are rarely comfortable men. They push boundaries, break conventions, create friction. The question for their superiors is whether their genius justifies the disruption they cause. With Patton, the answer has always been yes. Barely sometimes, grudgingly often, but yes. D-Day, June 1944. Patton not commanding troops storming the beaches, commanding a phantom army. The great deception operation called Fortitude. Fake radio traffic, dummy tanks, false intelligence fed to German spies, all designed to convince Hitler that the real invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. Patton playing a role, his enormous ego serving the mission. No glory, no combat, no headlines, just sitting in England pretending to command divisions that did not exist, while other men fought and died on the beaches. It must have been torture for him. But he did it. Because the mission required it. Because Eisenhower asked. Because underneath the swagger and the profanity and the ivory-handled pistols, Patton was a professional soldier who understood duty. August 1944. Third Army activated. Patton unleashed across France. The breakout from Normandy that everyone expected would take weeks, that Patton accomplished in days. 400 miles in 1 month. Paris liberated. German armies shattered.
The war that military planners thought might drag into 1946, suddenly looking like it could end in 1945. Because of speed, because of audacity, because of George Patton. December 1944. The Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. German panzers smashing through American lines in a desperate counter-offensive. Eisenhower calling an emergency conference, asking his army commanders who can relieve the surrounded garrison at Bastogne. Everyone else calculating, studying maps, estimating timelines, days, maybe a week. Patton saying, 48 hours. Can have Third Army there in 48 hours. Everyone else saying, impossible. Third Army is fighting in the Saar, facing east, engaged in offensive operations. To relieve Bastogne requires disengaging from combat, turning 90 degrees north, moving 3 entire divisions and all their supporting elements, coordinating new supply lines, establishing new command posts. Impossible in 48 hours. Impossible in a week. Maybe possible in 2 weeks with perfect conditions. Patton did it in 48 hours. Disengaged, turned north, smashed into the German flank, broke the siege of Bastogne, changed the entire dynamic of the battle. Impossible, made routine. And now this. The Palatinate cleared in 3 days, the Rhine crossed without permission, Frankfurt captured, an entire German army group paralyzed by speed. The pattern is clear, has been clear for years. Patton does not achieve the possible efficiently. He achieves the impossible consistently. The question that haunts Eisenhower, the question he has wrestled with since taking supreme command, is whether this represents genius or luck. Whether Patton succeeds because of his methods or despite them. Whether his philosophy of war is brilliant innovation or dangerous recklessness that happens to have worked so far. And whether Eisenhower himself, by enabling Patton, by protecting him, by giving him Third Army and pointing him at Germany, is a brilliant commander exploiting a unique asset, or a cautious administrator getting lucky with a subordinate who happens to succeed despite operating outside doctrine. The C-47 begins its descent. Through the window, Eisenhower can see Frankfurt, smoke rising from multiple points in the city, the scars of combat visible even from altitude, destroyed buildings, cratered streets, captured this morning. Eisenhower landing this afternoon. That is George Patton. That is Third Army. That is the impossible made routine. The aircraft touches down on Frankfurt Rhein-Main airfield. The runway is still being cleared. Destroyed Luftwaffe fighters pushed to the sides, bomb craters hastily filled. American engineers working even as the C-47 taxis to a stop. The door opens. Eisenhower steps out into German air. The first time he has set foot on German soil during this war.
He is aware of the symbolism, the supreme commander of Allied forces landing at an airfield that belonged to the Luftwaffe yesterday. And there, waiting at the edge of the runway, is George Patton, 59 years old, standing straight as a West Point cadet, despite a career that has lasted longer than most officers serve. Fresh uniform somehow, polished boots gleaming, ivory-handled pistol on his hip. That trademark grin that can mean genuine pleasure or calculated performance. With Patton, often both simultaneously. Behind him, a Mercedes staff car, German, probably belonged to some Wehrmacht general who fled when Third Army approached, now serving American purposes. That is Patton, taking what he needs from the enemy and using it. Eisenhower walks toward him, studies this man who has been his greatest asset and his greatest headache. This man whose genius and recklessness are so intertwined they cannot be separated. Patton snaps a salute. Perfect. Textbook. West Point precise. "Welcome to Frankfurt, sir. Captured it at dawn. Thought you might like to see it while the smoke is still rising." Eisenhower returns the salute. His voice is calm, controlled, but with an edge that Patton will recognize. The tone that says, "We are going to have a conversation about your methods." "George, do you have any idea how many regulations you have violated in the past week?" Patton's grin widens slightly. Not apologetic, not concerned. "No, sir. I have been too busy winning the war." They climb into the Mercedes. Third Army driver at the wheel, Bedell Smith in the front passenger seat, Eisenhower and Patton in the back. The drive through Frankfurt is surreal. Combat ended hours ago, but the city still bleeds. Buildings collapsed into rubble, streets cratered by artillery, burned-out vehicles, white flags hanging from windows where Germans hide and hope the Americans will not shoot them. And American troops, everywhere. 4th Armored Division tanks at intersections, infantry clearing buildings methodically, military police directing traffic, engineers clearing rubble. The organized chaos of an army that has taken a major objective and is already consolidating, already preparing for the next phase. Patton does not look at the destruction. His eyes are on a map spread across his lap, showing positions beyond Frankfurt, beyond the main river, showing routes deeper into Germany, to Nuremberg, to Munich, to Czechoslovakia, already planning 3 moves ahead. "George," Eisenhower says quietly, "you exceeded your fuel allocation, captured more prisoners than our entire POW system can process, crossed the Rhine without authorization, advanced so far ahead of First Army that you have exposed flanks for 60 miles, operated without coordinating with neighboring forces." Patton does not look up from his map. His finger traces a route toward the east. "Ike, look at this." He turns the map so Eisenhower can see. "Right here, we have cut off German 7th Army's entire retreat route. 12th Corps and 20th Corps are closing the gap. 2 days, maybe less, we will close the Ruhr pocket completely. That is 300,000 German soldiers removed from the war, maybe more. They cannot retreat east, cannot resupply, cannot reinforce. They are finished." Eisenhower leans over, studies the map. Patton is right. Third Army's advance has created an opportunity that SHAEF planning did not anticipate for another month. The Ruhr encirclement. Germany's industrial heartland, the source of steel and coal and weapons, defended by some of the Wehrmacht's best remaining units. SHAEF had projected weeks of coordinated operations by multiple armies to encircle it. Careful advances, methodical tightening of the noose. Patton has set up the encirclement in 1 week, through sheer speed, through moving faster than German commanders could react to or plan against. "And Montgomery?" Eisenhower asks, knowing this is the sensitive question, the political question. Patton looks up from the map, meets Eisenhower's eyes directly. "Monty is doing fine. He has the north secured. I have the center. Between us, we are crushing Germany from 2 directions simultaneously. His way works, my way works. They are different philosophies, but they both produce results, and the Germans cannot defend against both at the same time." It is the most diplomatic statement Eisenhower has ever heard from Patton, and it is accurate. Montgomery's methodical, overwhelming approach and Patton's fast, aggressive approach are both succeeding. The Germans cannot prepare for Montgomery's set-piece attacks without leaving themselves vulnerable to Patton's speed, cannot react to Patton's mobility without being crushed by Montgomery's firepower. Two philosophies, two methods, both necessary, both complementary. The car stops at Patton's forward headquarters, another commandeered building, German furniture, German painting still on walls, American maps covering every surface. Inside, Patton's staff has prepared a briefing. Colonel Maddox, Colonel Koch, officers who have learned to think at Patton's tempo, to plan operations that others would consider impossible. Patton spreads a large-scale map on the table. His finger moves across terrain. Ike, 93,000 prisoners as of noon today. Rhine bridgehead secure and expanding. Frankfurt captured. Main river crossings secured. We are positioned to drive on Nuremberg, Munich, Czechoslovakia. The German army in the southern sector is finished. They do not know it yet, but they are done. Eisenhower studies the map. The blue markers showing Third Army positions deep in Germany. The red markers showing German positions that are estimates, because German units are dissolving faster than intelligence can track them. The arrows showing planned axes of advance. It is audacious, reckless even, but also brilliant. And Eisenhower realizes he needs to ask the fundamental question. The question that will help him understand whether what he is seeing is luck or genius, chaos or method. How, George? Patton looks up. Sir, how do you do this? How do you move this fast? How do you capture 93,000 prisoners in 1 week? How do you cross major rivers without preparation? How do you operate ahead of your supply lines? What is the method? Patton is quiet for a moment. The grin fades. His expression becomes serious, thoughtful, the showman disappearing, the professional soldier emerging. Ike, it is not magic, not luck. It is understanding one fundamental principle that most commanders miss. What principle? Speed is not just a tactic, it is a weapon. The enemy's decision-making cycle is a vulnerability that can be exploited. He pulls the map closer, uses it to illustrate. German commanders observe the battlefield. They orient themselves to the situation. They decide on a course of action. Then, they act on that decision. That cycle takes time, hours, sometimes days when you factor in the time required for orders to reach units and for those units to execute. His finger traces American positions on the map. If you move faster than the enemy can complete that cycle, if you create multiple crises simultaneously across their entire front, you do not just defeat them tactically, you paralyze them operationally. They cannot process information fast enough to generate effective responses. Eisenhower listens carefully. This is not bravado, not performance. This is genuine military theory, sophisticated understanding of how armies function, or fail to function. Patton continues. Look at what happened in the Palatinate. German 7th Army headquarters was receiving reports from their forward units. By the time those reports reached headquarters, were analyzed, and orders were issued in response, the situation those orders addressed no longer existed. Our forces had already moved beyond those positions. So they issued new orders based on newer information, but those orders were outdated before they reached the units they were intended for. The whole system collapsed, not because we destroyed it with firepower, because we moved faster than it could function. He points to prisoner statistics on a status board. Entire regiments surrendered not because they were defeated in combat, because their commanders realized combat was pointless. When you receive orders to defend a position and enemy forces are already 10 miles behind that position, what purpose does defense serve? You can die for no tactical gain, or you can surrender and survive. More and more German commanders are choosing to surrender, not because they are cowards, because they are rational, because continued resistance achieves nothing. Eisenhower processes this. It is a sophisticated analysis, more sophisticated than he expected. Patton is not just acting on instinct, he is operating from a coherent philosophy, a theory of warfare that he has refined through experience. And casualties? Eisenhower asks, because this is the question that matters most, the human cost. Patton pulls out a casualty report, hands it to Eisenhower. SHAEF projected 12,000 casualties for the Palatinate operation based on conventional operational planning. We have taken less than 5,000.
Because we do not assault prepared positions. We bypass them, cut them off, force them to surrender rather than fight. The numbers are there, documented, verified. Every hour we pause to consolidate is an hour the enemy uses to establish new defensive positions, to bring up reserves, to organize counterattacks. So we do not pause, we maintain contact. We exploit success immediately before the enemy can react to failure. He meets Eisenhower's eyes directly. Speed saves lives, Ike. It does not cost them. The casualties come from attacking prepared positions, from fighting enemies who have time to organize effective defense. When you move faster than they can organize, when you are behind them before they establish positions, they surrender instead of fighting. Eisenhower looks at the casualty report, at the map showing impossible advances, at George Patton standing there with maps and statistics and a coherent military philosophy that produces results conventional doctrine says should not be possible. And he realizes something, realizes it fully for the first time, though he has known it peripherally for years. Patton is not succeeding despite breaking the rules. He is succeeding by understanding warfare at a level that doctrine has not caught up to. By operating in a conceptual space where speed and audacity create their own force multipliers, where tempo itself becomes a weapon more powerful than firepower or numbers. The question is not whether to rein him in. The question is how to enable this genius while preventing the disaster that recklessness always risks. How to use exceptional talent without being consumed by the chaos exceptional talent creates. Eisenhower walks to the window, looks out at Frankfurt, at the American flag flying over a city that was German yesterday, at the symbol of victory achieved through methods that should not work but do. He thinks about Montgomery in the north, methodical, careful, achieving objectives through overwhelming preparation, minimizing risk, ensuring success through superiority of resources. He thinks about Patton here in the south, fast, audacious, achieving objectives through speed that creates opportunities, accepting risk, ensuring success through superior tempo. Two philosophies, both working, both necessary, neither sufficient alone. And Eisenhower's role is not to choose between them, is to use both, to balance contradictions, to make incompatible methods work toward common objectives. He turns back to Patton, this man who captures 50,000 prisoners in one night, who crosses rivers without permission, who advances faster than maps can track, who makes the impossible routine. George, Eisenhower says quietly. Patton looks up. You are the only man I know who can make the impossible routine. The room goes completely silent. Patton stops moving. The constant energy that animates him stills. For just a moment, his face shows something rare, genuine emotion. Recognition that what Eisenhower just said was not a compliment, not a criticism, but something more profound, an acknowledgement, a recognition of something fundamental about who Patton is and what he does. Thank you, sir. Brief silence. The weight of 3 years of war in that silence. Sicily, where Eisenhower protected him. Normandy, where Patton played a role without glory. Bastogne, where impossible became routine. Now this. Then Patton's grin returns, smaller, more genuine. Now, about that gasoline allocation for the drive to Nuremberg. Eisenhower laughs, cannot help himself, despite everything, despite the violated regulations and the diplomatic nightmares with Montgomery and the political complications with Churchill. He laughs. Get back to work, George, and try to leave some Germans for the rest of us to capture. April 1st, 1945. Third Army has advanced 120 miles beyond the Rhine. The advance continues, unstoppable, inevitable, a machine that has learned how to operate faster than the enemy can respond to. April 4th, 1945. The Ruhr pocket closes completely. First Army from the north, Ninth Army from the east, Third Army's earlier advances from the south, creating the conditions. 317,000 German soldiers encircled.
the largest encirclement of German forces in the Western theatre. Third Army did the preliminary work in less than a week, the speed that created the opportunity. May 8, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. Third Army's final statistics are compiled by staff officers who still cannot quite believe what they are recording. 531 days of combat operations. From August 1st, 1944 to May 8th, 1945. 1.3 miles traveled, 12,000 cities and towns liberated or captured, 956,000 prisoners taken, approximately 400,000 enemy casualties inflicted. Third Army's own casualties, 137,000 total, 21,000 killed in action. The ratio is almost unprecedented in military history. For every American soldier killed in action, Third Army captured 45 German soldiers and removed them from the war, 45-1. At the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, military historians begin studying Third Army operations immediately, trying to understand how Patton achieved what he achieved, trying to codify it into doctrine that can be taught to future officers. Their conclusion, published in 1947, is both simple and profound. General Patton understood that in mobile warfare, the enemy's decision-making cycle is a vulnerability that can be exploited through superior operational tempo. If friendly forces can observe, orient, decide, and act faster than enemy forces can complete the same cycle, the result is not merely tactical advantage, but operational paralysis. Enemy forces are defeated not through superior firepower, but through superior speed that denies them the ability to organize effective resistance. It becomes the foundation for decades of American armor doctrine.
July 1945. Allied Interrogation Center, Wiesbaden, Germany. General Hermann Balck sits across from American intelligence officers, the man who commanded Army Group G, who faced Patton in southern Germany, who tried and failed to stop Third Army. The interrogators ask him to describe Patton's operations from the German perspective, to explain how it felt to face Third Army. Balck is quiet for a long moment, choosing words carefully, trying to articulate an experience that defied his professional understanding of warfare. Patton's operations were not simply fast, that word is inadequate. They were incomprehensible. We could not predict where he would strike next because he did not follow predictable patterns. He did not attack our strong points. He attacked where we were weak, and by the time we reinforced those positions, he was already somewhere else. He pauses, struggling to explain. He bypassed our strong positions entirely, left them isolated, cut their supply lines, and kept moving forward. We had divisions that never engaged American forces, that sat in prepared positions, waiting for attacks that never came, because Patton had already gone around them. And he never paused, never consolidated gains before pushing forward. Our doctrine, which had worked against every other Allied army we faced, assumed armies would need time after major operations, time to rest, resupply, reorganize. Patton never took that time. Balck looks directly at his interrogators. By the time we received orders to establish a defensive line, his tanks were already behind that line. We were always responding to situations that no longer existed. It was like fighting smoke, everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. You could not defend against him because by the time you understood where he was already somewhere else. The interrogators write this carefully, the testimony of a skilled German general, a veteran of both world wars, admitting that he was not defeated by superior firepower. He was defeated by superior speed. August 1945, Moscow. Soviet General Staff Headquarters. Soviet military theorists complete their analysis of American operations in Western Europe. The analysis has been ongoing since 1944, but intensifies after Germany's surrender, when more information becomes available. Colonel Andrei Volkov's reports from Paris form part of the database, intelligence gathered from multiple sources, analysis of captured German documents, interrogations of German officers who faced American forces. The section on Third Army operations is particularly detailed,
particularly interesting to Soviet theorists who developed deep battle doctrine in the 1930s. The analysis concludes that Patton's operational tempo exceeded Soviet norms for sustained offensive operations, that his methods for maintaining speed while managing logistics and command and control represented innovations worth studying. The report specifically recommends incorporating Patton's techniques for exploiting enemy decision-making paralysis through superior tempo into Soviet mechanized doctrine. His methods for operating on captured enemy supplies to maintain momentum should be studied for application to future Soviet operations against NATO forces in Central Europe. His acceptance of risk in extended supply lines in order to maintain operational tempo represents potential advancement of deep battle theory. The irony is profound. The Soviet Union pioneered operational maneuver warfare, developed the theory, proved it in combat against Germany, but now they are learning refinements from an American general who never studied their doctrine, who arrived at similar conclusions through different paths. Great military minds, it seems, converge on similar truths regardless of ideology or nationality.
November 1947, Nuremberg, Germany.
The war crimes trials are ending. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel sits in the dock, chief of the Wehrmacht High Command throughout the war, soon to be executed for war crimes, one of the most senior surviving German military officers. During testimony, a prosecutor asks him a question, not about war crimes, about military effectiveness. Which Allied general did the German High Command fear most? Keitel does not hesitate. Patton. The prosecutor asks him to elaborate. We always knew where Montgomery was going. His preparations were thorough but obvious. We could predict his objectives, his timelines, his methods. We could plan responses. Eisenhower was predictable in his caution. He made sound decisions, but conservative ones. We understood his thinking. Bradley was methodical and competent, but conventional. He pauses. But Patton, we never knew where he would strike next. We could not predict his objectives because he did not follow logical patterns. He did not attack where he should attack, did not pause when he should pause, did not consolidate when doctrine said he should consolidate. And once he started moving, we could not stop him, could not slow him, could not predict where he would be. It was this, more than his tactical skill, that made him dangerous. The uncertainty, the speed, the impossibility of planning against someone who operated faster than planning cycles could accommodate. The testimony is recorded, enters the historical record, the admission from Germany's highest surviving military leadership. They feared George Patton most, not because he was cruel, not because he was ruthless, because he was incomprehensible, because he operated at a tempo that broke their ability to respond. December 9th, 1945. Mannheim, Germany. 6 months after Germany's surrender. General George S. Patton is riding in a staff car with his Chief of Staff, Major General Hobart Gay, heading to a pheasant hunt, a brief escape from occupation duties, from the tedious work of governing defeated Germany. At 11:45 hours, the car collides with a U.S. Army 2.5-ton truck at an intersection. Low-speed collision, minor damage to the vehicles, but Patton is thrown forward violently. His head strikes a metal partition between the front and rear seats. Cervical spinal cord injury, paralysis from the neck down. He is conscious, aware, tells the medics who extract him from the car that he cannot move, cannot feel his legs, knows immediately what this means for a man whose entire life has been about movement, about action, about physical dominance. He lingers for 12 days at the 131st Station Hospital in Heidelberg, knows he is dying, tells visitors he would rather die than live paralyzed, that a warrior who cannot move is not a warrior, that this is not how he wanted it to end, but accepts it. December 21st, 1945. 17:50 hours. Patton dies. Pulmonary embolism. A blood clot from the paralysis. 60 years old. He never returns home to the United States, never receives the hero's welcome he deserved, never sees his grandchildren, never writes the complete memoirs that could have explained his philosophy in full. The man who captured 956,000 enemy soldiers, who advanced across Europe faster than armies are supposed to move, who made the impossible routine. Gone. Eisenhower, informed of Patton's death by telegram, retreats to his office, closes the door, sits alone for an hour. Then he writes a letter, not for publication, not official condolence, a personal letter, for himself, processing the loss of a man he worked with, argued with, enabled, and restrained for 3 years of war. The letter will be found years later among Eisenhower's private papers after his own death in 1969. George was the most brilliant combat commander I ever knew, also the most difficult. I would not have won the war without him. I probably could not have survived peacetime with him. He was a warrior in the truest sense, uncomfortable in any world but war, transcendent in combat. He understood something about warfare that doctrine has not caught up to, that speed itself is a weapon, that tempo creates opportunities that firepower alone cannot create, that moving faster than the enemy can think defeats them more effectively than superior numbers. My role was not to restrain his genius, but to enable it while preventing disaster, to give him objectives and resources, and then trust him to achieve the impossible, which he did, repeatedly, routinely. I will miss arguing with him, will miss the phone calls telling me he had done something I specifically told him not to do, will miss the results that justified the chaos. He made the impossible routine, and I recognized it when I saw it. That might be the truest epitaph for both men. Patton, who achieved the impossible. Eisenhower, who recognized it and enabled it. 1948. Eisenhower's memoir, Crusade in Europe, nearing completion. He sits at his desk in his office at Columbia University, where he now serves as president. The war 3 years behind him now. But writing about it brings it back. The decisions, the pressure, the impossible choices between competing goods. He writes a chapter about the Rhine crossings, about Montgomery's methodical plunder, about Patton's audacious Oppenheim, about balancing two philosophies that achieved the same objective through opposite methods. And he writes something he could not say during the war, could not articulate while managing personalities and egos, but understands now with the clarity that distance and reflection bring. I spent the war believing my role was to coordinate, to balance competing interests, to find middle ground between strong personalities, to keep everyone working together through diplomacy and compromise. George Patton taught me something different. Leadership sometimes means enabling genius, even when it creates chaos, means protecting audacity, even when it violates doctrine, means recognizing that exceptional talent does not fit into normal systems because it transcends those systems. I did not create George Patton, did not make him what he was. I simply did not destroy him, did not let political pressure or diplomatic complications or violated regulations cause me to remove him from command. And sometimes, that negative capability, the ability to not do something, is the most important decision a leader makes. The question history will ask is not whether systems or genius win wars. The question is whether leaders are wise enough to use both when the moment demands it. To recognize that contradictory methods can serve common objectives, that speed and preparation, audacity and caution, genius and system are not opposites to choose between, but complementary approaches to employ simultaneously. He sets down his pen. Thinks about that morning in March 1945, reading a report that said 50,000 prisoners in one night, about flying to Frankfurt, about standing in that room watching Patton point at maps and explain his philosophy, about saying the words that defined them both. Some men make the impossible routine. Rarer still are leaders who recognize genius when they see it, who enable it rather than suppress it, who use exceptional talent to achieve exceptional results. 1949. The U.S. Army publishes Field Manual 17-100, The Armored Division. Sections are directly based on Third Army's operations in 1945. The manual codifies Patton's emphasis on speed and deep penetration into official doctrine, makes his methods teachable, turns genius into system. Future armor officers will study these principles at Fort Knox.
At the Command and General Staff College, we'll learn that speed itself is a weapon, that operational tempo can paralyze enemy decision-making, that maintaining momentum often matters more than careful consolidation. 1980s. The US Army develops air-land battle doctrine, the concept of deep strikes into enemy rear areas, of disrupting enemy command and control before enemy forces can organize effective resistance, of operating inside the enemy's decision cycle. The intellectual lineage traces directly to what Patton proved in 1945.
To the demonstration that moving faster than the enemy can think defeats them more effectively than superior firepower. 2003. American armored forces drive from Kuwait to Baghdad in 3 weeks, bypassing Iraqi strongpoints, cutting supply lines, creating paralysis through speed. Iraqi forces surrendering not because they are defeated in combat, but because American forces are already past them, already behind them, already making resistance pointless. The echoes of March 1945 are unmistakable. March 23rd, 1945.
We return one final time to that moment, to Eisenhower's office at dawn, to the report on his desk. 50,127 prisoners, 18 hours. He picks up his pen, writes 3 words in the margin of the report. Impossible made routine. DDE. 3 words that captured a truth about warfare, about leadership, about human potential when exceptional talent is enabled rather than suppressed. 3 words that would be quoted in military academies for generations. 3 words that recognize genius without claiming to possess it. And perhaps that is the final lesson, the one that transcends tactics and strategy and doctrine, the one that applies to any human endeavor requiring leadership of exceptional people. Great leaders do not need to be geniuses themselves. They need to recognize genius in others, enable it, protect it, use it, direct it toward worthy objectives. And sometimes, most importantly, they need to simply not destroy it.
Need to resist the institutional pressure to suppress anything that does not fit normal patterns. Need to protect exceptional talent from the systems designed for normal talent. In 18 hours, George Patton changed warfare, demonstrated that speed could achieve what firepower alone could not, that operational tempo could paralyze enemies more effectively than superior numbers. In one sentence, Dwight Eisenhower defined leadership, recognized genius, acknowledged what Patton had achieved, articulated the principle that some men make the impossible routine. In 3 words, written in a margin, both truths were preserved for history. The impossible made routine. Not through magic, not through luck, through understanding warfare at a level that doctrine had not yet reached, through moving faster than enemies could respond, through weaponizing speed itself, and through leadership wise enough to recognize it, enable it, use it. Both lessons endure.